Yeah, it's kind of tough not being able to sing because I love to sing, as you know. And I love old hymns. I know that's going away. And churches are quitting singing them, going more to contemporary songs. And I know the day of the hymn is going to leave. I'm glad that I'm probably not going to live long enough to see that happen. So that's one thing I'm glad about. I'm glad they'll probably still be here when I die. So because I love old hymns. I love thinking I'm singing songs that are sometimes 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 years old, and I think how many people over the years have sat and sang those hymns to God. And I know that's probably not great a great argument, but I just think over the centuries, people have sang those songs, and I don't know, it just kind of has a great meaning to me. I work on a guy's bus, Donnie Williamson, and they go around and sing quartet gospel music, and he said that a lot of churches they go in now, he says, actually he has the hymn books from the Church of Christ in Wetumpka. He bought that building, and he's got boxes of those hymn books in his bus that they tour in, and he takes those into these churches, newer churches, and gives them to those kids and younger people in churches ask what these are. They never had a hymn book. Don't and sing some of them old hymns with them, and they've never sang some of those old hymns. So I know times change, and I love new music, contemporary music too, but my heart's really with the old hymns, and I do enjoy that. Got to be honest with you. I do enjoy it. Enjoy the stories behind them. Um, Music changes with time, and always has. But almost from hymns, you can almost tell the times they were written in, what was going on in people's lives. When people are prosperous and things are good, you get more joyful praise hymns. When times are bad, then you get hymns like, I need thee every hour, most precious Lord. One song we sing in our book, troublesome times are here. You know that song? Filling men's hearts with fear. Freedoms we once hold dear, now at our stake. Humbling our hearts to God, says from the chastening rod. See the way pilgrims trod. Christians awake. You know when that song was written? About 1944, right in the middle of, right about the end of World War II, that song was written. And if you listen to the words of that song, you can, isn't that true? End of World War II. World War II wasn't quite over. Troublesome times are here, filling men's hearts with fear. Freedoms we all hold dear, now are at stake. Song kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you realize when it was written. It has some timeless truths in it, but yeah. Anyway, I can talk about hymns all night. Back to Paul. Paul, we talked about his arrest before Felix and Festus, Drusilla, Bernice. Talked about all that situation. He's appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar he has to go. This is a part of the Bible that we have very seldom study. We very seldom look at it because it's very historical. It's not real, I guess you would say, emotional. But I love this part of the Bible because Luke, our historian that writes Acts, he's so accurate in what he writes, and it's often said by scholars that this is one of the most accurate accounts of an ancient ship voyage that exists in the world. And believe it or not, I know a guy that was actually converted because of this passage, or know of a guy that was converted because of this passage. And it has to, and so it's more historical, and I understand that. And I'm a history guy, and I know everybody's not, and that's okay. So I really like this. It really brings the Bible to me, that I can see it. It was here. This happened. This is where it was. And since we got the blessing to be able to go to Greece, and we went to the Isle of Crete, although we were on the other side of the Isle of Crete from where Paul was, going across the Aegean Sea, really kind of makes this more interesting to me, probably than it was before. It's so beautiful there, so beautiful. And it's just amazing to kind of put it into thought. So Paul's going to go to Rome, and that's what he wanted to do. And he's going he's going on the expense of Rome because he's appealed to Caesar. He's with a centurion named Julius, and he's going to make this journey. And this centurion is going to be with him throughout the entire journey. He warns them in Acts 27:10, and he warns them in 27:21, this isn't going to be good. We don't need to go. We need to wait. Now, if you're a prisoner and you're going to Rome, maybe you want to wait. I don't know, put it off. But Paul knew this wasn't going to go well for them. They all were spared because of Paul. We'll talk about that. He healed many. He was well cared for on Malta. There's a little bit of debate about exactly if that was the island we call Malta or not. But it was but anyway, this journey was pretty interesting. And I've done a lot of reading about it over the years and studying, because like I say, it is one of the earliest accounts of a ship voyage, most complete accounts of a ship voyage that we have in antiquity, not just biblically, but in antiquity. So it's a very interesting account. Paul was a historian, we know that. I mean, Luke was an historian, he was a physician, but he was very historical in what he did, in the way that he put it forward. In Acts 27, it was decided we would sail for Italy. In 10, he says, and I said to them, men have perceived that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of cargo and the ship, but also our lives. The centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship, what was being said by Paul. He put out from sea. It was a moderate wind. It's interesting how complete this is. He talks about the wind, and I'm going to try to explain that to you a little bit. These ships that they used were not like modern sailing ships. They were more of a square-sailed ship. And this was a long time ago, and that really plays into this story. And these ships were wooden, and they were not good at tacking into the wind. I don't know if you know what that means, but on a sailboat, it's easy with a following wind where the wind's behind you, and you can put your sails out and the wind pushes you along. But as my family can tell you, if you don't know how to tack a sailboat into the wind, you can stay in the ocean for a long, 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 long time and get severely sunburnt. It's a story you'll have to ask Susie about. So, because I obviously don't know how to do it. But the truth is that modern ships have, you see the triangular shaped sails, and they're able to tack. They go diagonally into the wind, and that's how they call tacking into the wind. They tack back and forth. But old sailing ships were very inefficient at that. They couldn't hardly do it. So they had to kind of wait for the wind they needed to get where they wanted to go. And certain times of the year, winds were prevailing. Means generally you would get a south wind, or generally you get a west wind. You see that here in Oklahoma. We see in the winter sometimes we have prevailing northerly winds. In the summer sometimes we have prevailing southerly winds. So they waited for the wind. And they were very primitive, but they were pretty large, carried a lot of wheat. They were carrying wheat, this ship. This ship originated, I think, in Alexandria. It was carrying wheat. They would load them with wheat, with cargo, but then they would take passengers also that would go along, and there were over 200 men on this ship. So it's a pretty good-sized ship. Now, if we read the account, I think I'm going to jump a slide ahead. If we read the account, might jump a couple slides ahead, of what happens in Acts. They basically were going up the coast, okay? And you can read this for yourself in Acts 27. But they went to Myra. They were going to go to Cnidus, okay? But the winds, they got to here. They were going to go up the coast, jump up the coast. That's generally how you would do that. But the winds wouldn't allow it, is what Luke says. So instead of going close to the coast and up this coast right here, basically what they did, they were supposed to kind of jump up the coast. That's generally how you did this. But if you read the account in Acts 27, it said the winds wouldn't allow it. So instead of doing that, they sailed to Crete. Crete is the largest island in the Mediterranean. They sailed to Crete, and they were going to sail within the lee of the island, okay? So the lee means where the wind wasn't. So they were going to sail towards Crete, and so they did. And when they went to Crete, they went to Fair Havens. The wind was bad, and there was a little port here, Fair Havens, on the Isle of Crete. And so they went into that port, and as you can see, it's not very big. And so the captain of the ship says, this isn't suitable for winter. In other words, we can't winter here all winter. So their plan is we'll just go a little further down the island of Crete, and we'll winter there. So they tried to go to Phoenix, okay? And this is Phoenix. It's up here on this island. But this wind came down. And when this wind came down, it blew them away. Like I said, they couldn't tack into the wind, okay? This is a very strong wind. So even though they were just trying to make this little jump right here, we'll just go down here and spend the winter. Sounds like a pretty good idea. But this wind right here blows in. This wind's blowing this direction. And it blows them out. And they know they can't get back. And so this is going to go on for 14 days. Now that's a long time. Now in those days, you had to tell your position by the stars or by the planets. Well, there wasn't any stars. There wasn't any planets. They couldn't know where they were. Now I've been in the water quite a bit in my life, and it's really scary when you don't know where you're at on the water, even on a small body of water. Me and Susie one night were fishing, and we got carried away and stayed out too late, and the wind came up, and we had to get back, and it was very frightening. We were singing hymns at the top of our lungs over the wind because we were scared, and we were singing like I need thee every hour, and we were singing like till the storm passes over, right? Till the thunder blows no more, till the clouds roll from the sky, right? Keep me safe, take my hand, right? Keep me safe till the storm passes by. Those hymns have meaning when you're on the water and you're getting blown into the water. So it's scary. And they were out there. They were scared. This wind was blowing. They were fearful for their lives. They didn't know what to do, and so they did some things. And it's very interesting in this text because Luke is so precise about what they did. He says they put out sea anchors. And they put, that's A.N. Lovell calling me, she literally, anyway. But anyway, so they put out sea anchors, which you put into the water, and they're like sails with cables, and it slows the ship down so you can't travel as far in the wind. And then when they got close to land, they put anchors from the stern to try to catch the land. Eventually, they knew they were getting next to land, but there's an interesting part in this, and if I can find it, where he says here, he said, I don't know if I can find the exact passage, but it says that they put girding, they undergirded with cables the ship. And that was to strengthen, these are wood ships, so they would pass cables under the ship, and they would cinch them tight to hold the ship together, to hold the wood on. Now that seems like not much to me and you. You're like, that doesn't mean anything to me and you. I read that a lot, it doesn't mean anything. But there's a story of a guy I know, a preacher I know, and he told me a story of a guy he knew that was an atheist. And the guy was also an archaeologist, and he was an archaeologist of this time. And he said, one reason I don't believe the Bible, he says, is because they didn't undergird ships in that time, at the time of Paul. That wasn't something that was done. They didn't do that. And it wasn't long after that archaeologists unearthed one of these old ships, and guess what? Lo and behold, it had cables underneath it, ropes strapped underneath it. And the guy converted to Christianity because of that passage of the Bible. What a unique story. And he's very specific about what happens. And so Paul has a vision. And Paul says, I know if we all stay on the ship that we're all going to live. An angel of the Lord appeared to me. Get up, eat. It's going to be all right. But some of the sailors, they wanted to save themselves, so they made a ruse. We're going to put down the ship's boat, and we're going to put out these anchors. And Paul says, oh no, unless we all stay on the ship, we won't all make it. So the centurion now, who listens to Paul, cut the ropes, put the small ship into the sea, and so they came to land. And the ship went aground on a reef, if we read the story, and they come between these two islands. And this is kind of a child's vision, but I like it because it shows them all squiggly in the middle. So they left Crete, and it was all squiggly for 14 days because they were getting blown around by the wind. And the wind kept blowing them, and the Bible says where two seas meet. That's what Luke says. So where two seas meet, they come into this passage, they hit a reef, the ship breaks apart, and he says, everybody that can swim to land. Everybody else get a plank, something you can float on. And the Bible says, just as Paul said, they were all brought safely to the land. They all arrived on this island. It's interesting in the text, it says they didn't recognize it. And a lot of scholars, there's about 4 different islands that scholars think this could be. And so there's a lot of debate about that because it says in the text they didn't recognize it. And they find it hard to believe that like 276 people, sailors, nobody recognized the island, but it was out of their route. So they get on this island, and Paul here, he is able to, the snake comes out of the fire and bites him. And we really think about Luke, and we think about that, the end of Luke, when it says you can handle snakes, but y'all know that's a textual variant, right? It doesn't exist in the oldest manuscripts, so we'll forget about that passage. But it's miraculous. So they think Paul's a god, and Paul heals people, and Paul takes care of people, and because of that, when they get ready to leave, they leave them well, they give them the provisions they need, they give them everything they need, because Paul's made such a great impact, and they leave, and they head towards Rome. They stop a couple places on the way. They meet the brethren. They go to Rome. Paul is going to be in Rome for about 2 years. He's going to be under house arrest. He's going to preach not only to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, to the Praetorian Guard, which is the Roman guard that takes care of him. And we believe some of them were converted because of the teachings of Paul. He's going to stay under house arrest this time, has some freedom. Has a pretty good place to stay. He's going to write Philemon, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philippians from his first Roman imprisonment. So very important work that he did. Paul was busy. Even though he was in prison, he was busy, happy where he was, doing those things that he did. That's where Acts ends. Acts ends with Paul in prison in Rome. He's going to be released. There's no charges that the emperor of Rome is going to find worthy of. Who's Nero now? Who's going to find worthy of doing anything to Paul? He will be released for about a year. And I want to talk about that year, not next Sunday night because I won't be here, but the Sunday after. I want to talk about that year that he was released because he did some very important things in that last year that we don't have in Acts. Because like I said, Acts ends here. But we know that Rome burned. You've probably heard that expression, Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Rome burned to the ground. Christians were blamed because they were easy to blame. And because of that, Christians become under severe persecution because of Nero. Nero eventually is going to re-imprison Paul and Peter at about the same time, about 64 AD. He's going to imprison Paul and Peter. Between those times, I want to talk about that Sunday night after next. He wrote the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, Titus. In his second Roman imprisonment, he's going to write 2 Timothy. In his second Roman imprisonment, he won't be under house arrest. He'll be in the Tamertine dungeon in Rome, chained into a cell, a small cell in the cold and the dark. It's winter, we know, because of 2 Timothy. So it won't be the same thing. At the end of his second Roman imprisonment, Nero's going to behead him, and he's going to crucify Peter in about 66 AD, and that's kind of going to be the end of Paul's life. But we'll finish that up next Sunday night. I hope you find it interesting. Maybe you'll go read Acts 27 through the end for yourselves and read this story. It's not something we read much. You're like, oh, that's just history. That's just history. But you know, that's what makes the Bible real, isn't it? Is that it's real places, it's real people, it's real events. And if you read the story, Luke is so good about giving us all those details. It was too late in the year. It was past the time of unleavened bread. That's September. So very late in the winter. Their winters are winter. They're in the northern hemisphere. Their winters are winter. So if you read that, it kind of comes to life. Interesting, real places, real times, real events. This really happened. This is how it happened. Makes the Bible real to me, and I hope it does to you. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing.